Welcome to Bedtime Stories on Canvas, a quiet, cozy place where gentle stories and the soft movement of paint across a canvas come together to help you relax, slow your thoughts, and drift peacefully towards sleep. Tonight, as you listen, you'll also see calm, slow painting on the screen, simple strokes of color moving gently across the canvas. This is my own little way of relaxing my mind. I use paint by numbers, so I'm not a professional artist at all, and that's perfectly okay. Please don't judge the painting, just let it be part of the calm atmosphere, and when it's complete, I'll share the finished piece with you. For now, just settle in, get comfortable, maybe adjust your pillow, loosen your shoulders, and take a slow, deep breath. Before we begin our journey tonight, I'd love to invite you to gently like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's a simple way to support this peaceful space, and it truly means so much to me. I'm also always curious, where in the world are you listening from right now, and what time is it for you? Feel free to share it in the comments. And now, settle in, let your body relax, and allow the noise of the modern world to slowly fade away. Far away, deep within the thick, green rainforests of Central America, there are places where time seems to stand completely still. Hidden beneath layers of vines, roots, and towering trees lie silent cities. These are not small ruins, not simple remains, but vast and powerful places. Massive stone pyramids rise high above the jungle canopy, their steps worn smooth by centuries long gone. Wide plazas stretch between ancient temples, now covered in moss and shadow. Tree roots twist and wrap around carved stones, as if nature itself is gently reclaiming what was once taken. For a very long time, these cities were forgotten by the outside world. Only the local people, living quietly nearby, knew of their presence. To them, these ruins were not just stones, but the resting places of ancestors, echoes of something ancient and powerful, something that once lived and breathed. This was the world of the Maya civilization, one of the most remarkable civilizations to ever exist. At their height, they were among the most advanced societies on Earth. They created a complete writing system, something very rare in the ancient Americas. Their symbols, carved carefully into stone, told stories of kings, battles, rituals, and daily life. They developed a calendar so precise, so beautifully accurate, that even today, it continues to amaze historians and scientists. And above all, they watched the sky. Night after night, they studied the stars, the planets, the slow movements of the heavens. With patience and deep understanding, they tracked these patterns with a level of accuracy that would not be matched again for nearly 1,000 years. As you listen, you might imagine them standing beneath a wide, dark sky filled with stars, their eyes gently following the slow movement of light across the heavens. And as the brush glides softly across the canvas in front of you, perhaps your own thoughts begin to drift just a little, becoming quieter, softer. The Maya were not only thinkers and observers. They were also builders, artists, and rulers. Their cities were filled with towering temples, grand staircases, and beautifully carved monuments. Their art was detailed and expressive, showing gods, animals, and powerful kings. These kings were not ordinary rulers. They were believed to be divine, chosen by the gods, acting as a bridge between the human world and the spiritual one. Life in these cities was rich and complex, but it was also shaped by strict traditions, powerful beliefs, and sometimes harsh and difficult rituals. There were ceremonies that could seem strange to us today, even brutal. But to them, these acts were deeply meaningful. Part of keeping balance in their world, part of honoring their gods, and ensuring the survival of their people. And then, something began to change. Not suddenly, not in a single moment, but slowly. Very slowly. In the southern regions of their lands, something started to unravel. The great cities, once full of life, began to empty. Plazas that once echoed with voices fell silent. Temples that once stood at the center of ceremonies were left behind. One by one, these powerful cities were abandoned. The population began to shrink. Families moved away, rulers disappeared, and entire regions that had once thrived faded into quiet stillness. And no one knows exactly why. Even today, it remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in history. Tonight, we will gently explore this mystery together. We will travel back into their golden age when their cities were alive, with energy and purpose. And then, slowly, like careful archaeologists, we will begin to look at the clues they left behind. Clues hidden in the stones, in the soil, in the silent remains of what once was. These clues suggest something powerful, something complex, a combination of struggles. Not just one cause, but many. Endless warfare between cities, long periods of severe drought, and even damage to their own environment, changes that may have made survival more difficult over time. A perfect storm, slowly building until the balance could no longer hold. If you're enjoying this calm space, you might take a gentle moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's a simple way to support this peaceful little corner, and it truly means a lot. Now, bring your attention back to the soft movement of the brush, to the quiet story unfolding, to your own breathing, steady and calm. And as we step gently into the world of these silent cities, you may notice your body beginning to relax, your eyes growing just a little heavier as the past and the present begin to softly blend together. Our journey now continues, quietly, gently, carrying us deeper into the living green world of the jungle. A place where the air feels thick, warm, and still, where sunlight only touches the ground in soft, broken pieces, slipping through layers of leaves. Far above, for a very long time, longer than most stories can remember, great stone cities rested here, hidden beneath vines, roots, and silence. They were not destroyed, not erased, just forgotten. And as your eyes follow the slow movement of the brush across the canvas, you may begin to imagine that same feeling of something ancient slowly being revealed layer by layer. Far away, beyond this jungle, in another time, people spoke only in whispers about such places. They spoke of strange carved figures, of towering stone structures, of ruins so large they seemed impossible. But most who heard these stories did not believe them. At that time, many simply could not imagine that such greatness could belong to the people of the Americas. Instead, they searched for answers elsewhere, thinking perhaps these cities had been built by distant civilizations like ancient Egypt, or forgotten travelers from lands across the sea. And as another soft stroke of paint glides across the canvas, you can almost feel those old ideas gently fading away, dissolving into something quieter, something truer. Then, slowly, the story began to change. Not all at once, but with the quiet determination of two men, each bringing something different, yet perfectly balanced. One of them was John Lloyd Stevens, a man who carried curiosity like a compass, always pointing him toward the unknown. The other, Frederick Catherwood, saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be captured carefully, truthfully, through his hands. Together, they stepped into uncertainty, not knowing exactly what they would find. The year was 1839, and their path led them into lands we now know as Honduras and Guatemala. But back then, these places were far less known, wild, unpredictable, and difficult to travel through. The jungle did not make things easy. The air was heavy, almost hard to breathe at times, the ground wet and uneven beneath their steps. Insects filled the air, rain would come suddenly, without warning, and everything, clothes, tools, even thoughts, seemed to slow under the weight of it all. At moments, they even found themselves surrounded by tension, local conflict, uncertainty, having to speak carefully with armed men just to continue moving forward. You might imagine those slow steps, one foot in front of the other, moving deeper, deeper into the unknown. Still, they did not turn back. There was something ahead, something just out of reach, guiding them forward. With the help of someone who knew the land, they followed narrow paths, hidden trails, until one day everything changed. Near the Copan River, they stopped. The forest around them was thick, almost closed in, so they began to clear away, cutting through vines, pushing branches aside, slowly opening space where none had been before. And as your eyes rest on the canvas, watching the brush reveal new shapes, new colors, you can feel that same quiet discovery unfolding gently. And then they saw it. Not all at once, but piece by piece, stone. Carved stone. Rising silently from the earth, as if it had always been there, waiting. Tall monuments, covered completely in detailed carvings, faces, figures, patterns so complex, they seemed almost alive. Frederick Catherwood stood still, taking it all in, recognizing the skill, the balance, the beauty. This was not something simple. This was the work of a civilization that understood art, structure, and meaning at the highest level. Something equal, in its own way, to ancient Greece or any great culture of the past. But it was John Lloyd Stevens who understood the deeper truth. This did not come from somewhere else. It belonged here. This was the voice of a people who had always been part of this land, a story that had simply been overlooked. And in that moment, something shifted. Not just for them, but for history itself. Soon after, Stevens made an unusual choice. He purchased the entire site for a small sum, almost nothing compared to its true value. While Stevens wrote, capturing each step of their journey in words, Frederick Catherwood worked in his own way. Patiently, carefully. Even in the heat, even with tired hands, he continued. Using a special tool, he traced what he saw, line by line, detail by detail. Not rushing, not guessing, just observing and recording exactly as it was. Much like the brush you see now, moving slowly, shaping something beautiful, one gentle motion at a time, those drawings, when they were finally seen, opened a window into a forgotten world. They were not imagined scenes, but real, precise, and deeply powerful. And still, the journey continued. They moved on, discovering more hidden places, like Palenque, where soft carvings seemed to emerge from mist and shadow, and Tikal, where massive pyramids rose high above the forest, like quiet mountains made by human hands. You can almost see them, standing tall, silent, timeless. Now, let your thoughts slow once more, let the images soften, and as we continue, gently, into the next part of this story, you may notice your body becoming more relaxed. You're breathing deeper, and your mind drifting just a little closer to sleep. Our journey continues, drifting a little deeper now into the quiet mystery that these discoveries revealed. What Stevens and Catherwood had found left no doubt. Long before the arrival of Christopher Columbus, a great and sophisticated civilization had already risen, flourished, and faded here in the Americas. The silent cities were no longer just whispers or imagination. They were real. They had been waiting patiently beneath the jungle until someone finally listened. And as the brush moved slowly across the canvas, revealing gentle shapes, you might feel that same sense of uncovering something hidden, now softly coming into view. But with this discovery came a deeper question. Who were these people who built such magnificent cities? And why would they leave them behind to be slowly taken by the forest? The work that followed, piece by piece, began to reveal a story. A long story stretching across centuries. From around 250 to 900 AD, this civilization shaped the intellectual, artistic, and spiritual life of ancient America. This was the world of the Maya civilization, during what we now call its classic age. But this world was not one single empire, not one king ruling over all. Instead, it was something more fluid, more alive. A network of many independent city-states, each with its own ruler, its own land, its own ambitions. Cities like Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Calakmul stood as powerful centers, sometimes allies, often rivals. Their stories, carved into stone, speak of shifting friendships, carefully arranged royal marriages, and moments of conflict, carried out with ritual and meaning. And as the brush glides again, gently layering color upon color, you may sense that quiet movement of history, never still, always changing. You can imagine fields stretching under the sun, each plant growing slowly, quietly, just as your thoughts begin to slow. At the very heart of this entire world, there was something simple, yet essential. A single plant. Maize, or corn. For the Maya, this was not just food. It was life itself. Their identity, their beliefs, their daily rhythm all grew from this one source. They were, in every sense, people of the corn. But growing maize here was not easy. The soil was thin, the rains were uncertain, and the jungle always ready to take back the land. So they adapted. They learned patiently, creatively. They cleared small plots using careful fire, built terraces along hillsides, and shaped the wetlands into raised fields that could hold water. Farming was not just work. It was a sacred cycle. Planting, growing, harvesting, again and again, at the center of this sacred rhythm, stood the king. The Kuholajah, the Holy Lord. He was not simply a ruler or a leader in battle. He was something more. A bridge between worlds, between the people and the gods. His role was not just to govern, but to maintain balance, to ensure that the sun would rise, that the rains would come, that life would continue. To fulfill this role, the king gave something deeply personal: his own blood. In sacred ceremonies, he would perform rituals of offering using sharp tools made from obsidian stone or bone. He would carefully, deliberately draw blood from his own body. This was not done in violence, but in belief. The blood would fall onto paper, which was then burned, sending smoke upward into the unseen world. Within that rising smoke, it was believed a doorway would open. A vision, a connection through which the king could speak to the gods and the ancestors. This was the balance at the heart of their world. The people offered their labor, their harvest, their maize. And the king, in return, offered himself to the gods. As long as this exchange continued, the world remained in harmony. The rains would fall, the crops would grow, the cities would thrive. But it was a delicate balance, a fragile promise that the actions of one could influence the sky itself. For many years, even after these cities were rediscovered, their deepest secrets remained hidden. The carvings, covering temples and monuments, were beautiful, detailed, and mysterious. But no one could read them. Scholars believed they were only decorative, symbols without language, stories that could never be understood. And as the brush gently traces another line, you might imagine those carvings, silent, waiting, holding their meaning, just out of reach. You may picture that rising smoke, soft, curling, fading into the air. But slowly, patiently, that silence began to break. Because hidden within those carvings was something extraordinary. A true writing system. The only complete one ever developed in the ancient Americas. The voice of the Maya, waiting to be heard again. This writing was not simple. It was rich, layered, and beautifully complex. Some symbols represented whole words, others sounds, syllables. A single idea could be written in different ways, either as one detailed symbol or carefully built piece by piece. These glyphs were arranged into neat square blocks, flowing across surfaces in a gentle pattern, left to right, top to bottom, like a quiet rhythm you could almost follow with your eyes. At the core of all this knowledge was their understanding of numbers. The Maya used a base 20 system, simple yet powerful. A dot meant 1, a line meant 5, and a special shell symbol represented something remarkable. 0. The idea of nothing as a number. It may seem small, but it was a huge step in human thought. Many civilizations, even great ones like the Romans, never fully developed this concept. But here, deep in the jungle, it was already understood. And as the final soft strokes in this moment settle onto the canvas, you may feel that quiet brilliance, simple, clear, and deeply peaceful. Now, let your mind rest for a moment. Let all these ideas soften and settle like paint drying slowly on the canvas. And as we continue our journey, you may notice your body becoming heavier, your breath slower, and your thoughts gently drifting towards sleep. For the Maya, their understanding of numbers was not just clever, it was essential. It allowed them to count far beyond what most ancient cultures could imagine, to work with numbers reaching into the millions, and to follow the slow, endless cycles of time with remarkable precision. Because for them, time was not just something that passed, it was sacred. The Maya did not rely on just one calendar. Instead, they created several, each one carefully designed, each one connected to the others, like interlocking wheels turning together. One of these was the Chichén, a cycle of 260 days, used for rituals, ceremonies, and quiet moments of spiritual meaning. Alongside it was the Hob, a 365-day cycle, guiding the seasons, the planting, and the harvest. These two calendars moved together, slowly aligning, then shifting again, creating a larger cycle of 52 years, a rhythm that repeated again and again. And as another gentle stroke settles onto the canvas, you might imagine these cycles turning, softly, like gears moving in perfect harmony. But the Maya did not stop there. They wanted to measure something even greater, time that stretched far beyond a single life, or even many generations. So they created what we now call the long count calendar. A continuous count, marking every single day, from a distant and mythical beginning, around the year 3114 BC. This system allowed them to place events, kings, and entire histories within a timeline that stretched across centuries. And it is because of this that today, historians can read their monuments and understand exactly when things happened with a clarity rarely seen in the ancient world. This deep understanding of time came from something equally patient, observation. High above their cities, on the tops of pyramids, Maya priest astronomers watched the sky. Night after night, they studied the movement of the sun, the moon, and the wandering planets. With careful attention, they learned to predict eclipses, moments when the sky itself seemed to shift, events they believed carried powerful meaning. They were especially drawn to the planet Venus, tracking its cycles with great care, linking it to war, ritual, and important decisions. And as the paintbrush softly traces another line, you might imagine those quiet nights, the sky wide and full of stars, everything moving slowly, perfectly, in its place. For the Maya, all of this, the writing, the numbers, the calendars, the stars, was part of one single purpose: to understand the universe, not as something chaotic, but as something ordered. A vast, intricate system, guided by repeating patterns. Their goal was simple, yet profound: to live in harmony with those patterns, to align their world with the deeper rhythm of the cosmos. To them, the universe was like a great text, written not in words, but in stars, in time, in cycles. And they were its careful readers. Patient, observant, devoted. At its height, around 750 AD, this world must have felt strong, stable, almost eternal. The great cities of the southern lowlands were alive with movement and purpose. Tikal rose high above the jungle, its towering pyramids watching over a busy and thriving city. Calakmul, the powerful serpent kingdom, held influence across vast lands, connected through alliances and loyalty. And in Köpen, artists carved some of the most detailed and beautiful monuments ever created. The population was large, traditions were strong, and everything seemed to follow a predictable, sacred order. But quietly, almost invisibly, something began to change. Not all at once, but slowly. The first signs were not loud or dramatic. They were silent, written in what was no longer written. For centuries, Maya kings had marked their rule with carved stone monuments, recording dates, victories, important moments. These records were precise, consistent, unbroken. Until they weren't. In the late 8th century, one by one, the cities began to fall silent. At Palenque, the last known date appears in 799 AD. At Köpen, it is 822 AD. And at the great city of Tikal, the final monument is dated to 869 AD. After that, nothing. The long tradition simply stops. No more carvings, no more public records. The voice of the kings fades into silence. And as another soft stroke spreads across the canvas, you may feel that stillness, deep, quiet, and a little unsettling. Within the cities themselves, there are more signs. Large construction projects left unfinished. Temples only partly built. Wide plazas never fully completed. Stone blocks carefully carved but left behind as if the workers had simply walked away. It is a haunting image, a place frozen in time. In these final years, the cities themselves began to change. Walls appeared, built quickly, without the elegance of earlier designs. Fortifications rising around palaces and temples. A clear sign of fear. At the same time, the quality of art began to decline. Pottery became simpler, jade carvings less refined. The networks that once carried luxury goods began to weaken and fade. The great system that once connected everything was slowly breaking apart. And yet, it is important to remember, this was not the same everywhere. Not all Maya cities fell at once, not all people experienced the same fate. What was happening was complex, layered, and still not fully understood. Now, let your thoughts slow once more. Let the story rest gently in your mind, like paint settling softly into the canvas. And as we move forward into the deeper mystery of this unraveling, you may feel yourself drifting more relaxed, more still, and just a little closer to sleep. Now, as we continue, let the story carry you a little further, deeper into this quiet unfolding mystery. The great unraveling did not happen everywhere at once. It was centered in the southern lowlands, the ancient heartland of the Maya civilization. Here, cities that had stood strong for centuries began to weaken and slowly fade. Yet at the very same time, in the north, something different was happening. In places like Chichén Itzá, new life was beginning to grow. New influence, new energy, a final bright moment of culture and creativity. But in the south, the pattern is clear. Over the course of about 150 years, the great cities emptied. Places that had once been full of voices, footsteps, ceremony, became quiet. A civilization that had thrived for more than 6 centuries began to loosen, to unravel, thread by thread. People left their homes, their temples, their plazas, until only silence remained. And as another soft stroke spreads across the canvas, you may feel that stillness, settling gently, like evening light fading away. This silence left behind a question. A deep, lingering question: what happened here? Why did they leave? For many years, this question stayed unanswered. But slowly, as the ancient writing was understood, and the stones began to speak again, a picture began to form. Not a simple one, but something more intense, more human, more fragile. Warfare had always been part of Maya life. But it was not always like we might imagine. In earlier times, conflict was controlled, almost ceremonial. The goal was not to destroy entire cities, but to capture important figures, kings, nobles. These captives would then be brought back, displayed, humiliated, and eventually sacrificed as part of sacred rituals. It was harsh, yes, but it followed rules, patterns, expectations. But in the final century, something changed. The balance began to break. The images carved into stone and painted onto walls tell a different story now. They become darker, more chaotic. Scenes of single captured rulers are replaced by entire armies clashing in the jungle. Warriors dressed in jaguar skins, feathered headdresses flowing, battles no longer controlled, but desperate. At the site of Bonampak, murals still remain. They show scenes that are difficult, even today, to fully take in. Captured nobles, suffering, awaiting their fate, moments of violence, painted in vivid detail. A glimpse into a time when fear had begun to take hold. And as the brush continues, gently, carefully, you may let those images soften, fade, becoming distant, less sharp. The ground itself tells the same story. In places like Tikal, archaeologists have found defensive walls, built quickly, without the grace of earlier construction. these were not planned, confident structures. They were urgent, protective, a sign that something had gone wrong. At some sites, there are mass graves, remains of people who met violent ends, evidence of conflict far beyond what had come before. One of the clearest stories comes from a region in Patek's region. Here, at the city of Dos Pilas, a ruling dynasty began to expand aggressively. For a time, they succeeded. Their influence grew, their power spread. But this expansion did not bring stability. Instead, it triggered constant retaliation, conflict after conflict, until the entire region was caught in a cycle of violence. Their final stronghold, Aguatica, was abandoned suddenly. So suddenly that meals were left unfinished, objects left behind, as if life had been interrupted in a single moment. From this, one possible answer begins to form. That warfare, once controlled, had grown beyond its limits. That constant conflict made it difficult to farm, to trade, to live peacefully. Fields may have been left untended, food becoming scarce, trade routes breaking down, essential materials no longer arriving. And perhaps most importantly, the faith in kings began to fade. If the king could not protect his people, if he could not bring balance, then the entire system began to weaken. But even this is not the whole story. Because another struggle was taking place, not between people, but between people and the land itself. A quieter conflict, but no less powerful. The rainforest may seem rich, endless, full of life. But beneath that green surface, the soil is thin, delicate, easily worn away. To support large cities required care, balance, and skill. For centuries, the Maya managed this beautifully. They built terraces, shaped the land, created systems that worked in harmony with nature. But as their population grew, especially by the 8th century, the pressure increased. The first demand was food. Cities like Tikal may have held tens of thousands of people. To feed them, vast areas of forest had to be cleared to grow maize, beans, squash. The land was asked to give more and more, and then there was another demand. One that is less obvious, but just as powerful. Construction. The great pyramids, temples, and palaces were not simply stone. They were covered in smooth, bright white plaster, giving them a shining, almost glowing appearance. To create this plaster, limestone had to be burned at extremely high temperatures. And to do that, they needed wood. Large amounts of it. Trees, cut and burned again and again, and as the brush moves slowly across the canvas, layer building upon layer, you may feel that quiet cost, hidden beneath beauty. Over time, this demand grew immense. More fields, more wood, more building, more pressure on a land that was never meant to carry so much. And slowly, almost invisibly, the balance began to slip. A system that had worked for centuries was beginning to strain. And as the final soft strokes of this moment settle onto the canvas, you may feel that gentle tension, like something stretched just a little too far. Now, let your mind rest here for a moment. let the story soften, like paint drying quietly on the canvas. And as we continue into the final pieces of this mystery, you may feel yourself drifting calmer, slower, and gently towards sleep. Now, let the story continue, slowly, like a quiet breath. To build the great temples of cities like Tikal, the Maya needed something more than stone. They covered their pyramids in smooth, bright white plaster, a shining surface that caught the sunlight, making the cities glow. But creating this plaster came at a cost. A very quiet, but very heavy cost. To produce enough lime for just one great pyramid, vast areas of forest had to be cleared, trees cut and burned, again and again. And as rival kings tried to outdo one another, building taller, grander, more impressive monuments, this demand only grew. Over time, the landscape began to change. What was once dense, green jungle slowly became a patchwork, fields of maize, open land, and hillsides stripped bare. The roots of the trees, once holding the soil in place, were gone. And when the rains came, they no longer nourished the land the same way. Instead, they washed the soil away, carrying it into rivers and lowlands. The forest itself had done more than provide wood. It had held moisture, helped shape the local climate, kept the balance between rain and dry seasons. Without it, the land began to dry more easily. The dry seasons stretched longer, the rains became less certain, and the loss went beyond farming. There were fewer animals to hunt, less wood for building, fewer plants for healing. Everything slowly becoming harder. And as the brush moves gently across the canvas, layer upon layer, you may feel how something beautiful, the evidence of this change, is still there today. Hidden, not in the air, but in the earth. Deep beneath lakes, layers of mud have preserved tiny traces of the past. Scientists study these layers, looking at ancient pollen, small grains that tell the story of what once grew there. And what they find is clear. A sudden drop in tree pollen, and a rise in weeds, plants that grow in disturbed land. A silent record of forests disappearing. All of this suggests something important, that the very success of the Maya, their growing population, their shining cities, their ambition, may also have made them fragile. They had built something brilliant, but delicate. A civilization balanced carefully, with very little room for error. And then, another force entered the story. Not from the ground, but from the sky. The Maya world depended on rain. Everything, their crops, their water, their survival, rested on the steady return of seasonal rains. For a long time, this pattern held. But then, quietly, it began to change. For many years, this was only a theory. But modern science has found ways to listen to the past. In the lakes, and deep within caves, natural records have been preserved. In places like the Yucatan Peninsula, scientists study layers of sediment and minerals like gypsum that appear more during dry times. And inside caves, slow-growing stone formations, called stalagmites, hold tiny chemical clues, recording rainfall over thousands of years. And as the brush continues its gentle rhythm, you might imagine time itself, captured in layers, quiet, patient, waiting to be understood. When these records were studied together, they told a clear story. During the Maya's time of growth, rainfall had been strong, reliable, generous. But around 750 AD, everything changed. A long period of drought began. Not just a few dry years, but decades, even longer, with repeated and severe droughts. The effects would have been devastating. Reservoirs, carefully built to hold water, began to shrink, then dry. The maize fields, the foundation of life, failed again and again. The forest itself began to struggle, even sacred water sources, growing uncertain. Cities that once held thousands became places of thirst and hunger. In this moment, everything came together. The weakened land, the growing population, the rising conflicts, and now the failing rains. A perfect storm. The kings, who claimed they could bring the rains, performed more rituals, more offerings, but the sky remained silent. And slowly, people began to lose faith. Not just in their rulers, but in the entire system that had guided their lives. What followed was not one sudden event, not a single moment of destruction, but a slow, human decision. People began to leave. Families, one by one, gathering what little they could carry, walking away from the great stone cities that had once defined their world, returning to smaller, simpler lives. Closer to the land, more sustainable, more flexible. The cities emptied. At first, the great temples and palaces stood alone. For a time, some people remained, living quietly among the empty spaces. But eventually, they too moved on, until there was no one left. And then, the jungle returned. Seeds carried by the wind, roots breaking through stone, green life slowly covering everything again. This was not a fiery end, not a sudden collapse, but a long, quiet fading. A great civilization slowly letting go. And as the strokes of this moment settle onto the canvas, you may picture that gentle reclaiming, not violent, not rushed, but patient and complete. And as you rest with that thought, you may feel your own mind growing softer, your body heavier, as the story, like the jungle, wraps gently around you and carries you peacefully towards sleep. After the people left, the jungle did not rush in all at once. It returned slowly, patiently. The great trees, like the Ceiba and Ramon, began their quiet work. Their roots, strong and determined, pushed beneath the stone, lifting, cracking, slowly breaking apart the temples, splitting staircases, and gently toppling the carved monuments of kings. And as the brush moves in slow, steady strokes, you may feel that same quiet persistence, not forceful, but unstoppable. Over time, year after year, the green world spread further. A thick blanket of plants, vines, and trees covered everything. The tall pyramids, once visible from far away, slowly softened. Their sharp edges fading, their stone hidden beneath soil, leaves, and roots, until they no longer looked like cities at all, but like hills. The great plazas, where thousands once gathered, became shaded clearings. The loud voices, the ceremonies, the movement of life were replaced. The echo of the ball courts, once filled with cheers, gave way to the deep, distant calls of howler monkey. The sounds of markets, of priests, of daily life faded into insects, wind, leaves. The cities had fallen silent. And they would remain that way for nearly 1,000 years. Hidden beneath the forest, their stories, their knowledge, their art resting undisturbed. The outside world forgot them. But not completely. Among the descendants of the Maya civilization, memories remained, carried through stories, traditions, quiet knowledge, and as the brush continues its gentle motion, you may hear that quiet world, soft, natural, calm. You may feel how memory, like paint, can linger even when unseen. You may imagine those shapes, once strong and clear, now softened, resting quietly. To the rest of the world, it was as if these cities had never existed. They waited, silently, for the moment, far in the future, when they would be found again. When someone would look at those green-covered hills and realize something was hidden beneath. But this was not the end of the Maya story. Not at all. The so-called collapse was not an ending. It was a transformation. As the southern cities faded, the center of life began to shift northward, toward the Yucatan Peninsula. In this new landscape, flatter, drier, a different kind of world began to grow. Cities here did not fall. They adapted. They changed. And one of the greatest among them was Chichén Itzá, a place of beauty, power, and new ideas. Its buildings still carried the spirit of the Maya, but also showed influence from distant cultures, blending styles, blending traditions. This was a city of warriors and traders. A place where power was not only shown through ritual, but through movement, exchange, connection. At its heart stood the Great Pyramid, known as El Castillo, rising in perfect symmetry. Nearby, the largest ball court in the ancient Americas, and long rows of carved columns, standing quietly like watchers from another time. All connected to the presence of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, a symbol of power and transformation. And as the brush moves again, carefully adding detail, you may feel that quiet strength, steady, grounded, and as another soft stroke blends into the canvas, you may feel that flow, movement, connection, calm and continuous. These northern cities survived because they adapted. They did not rely only on rainfall. Instead, they built strong trade networks. Using large wooden canoes, they traveled along the coasts, carrying goods like salt, honey, cotton, and obsidian, connecting distant places, building a system that was flexible, resilient even as time passed. And these northern cities also changed, declined, and much later faced the arrival of the Spanish. The Maya people themselves endured. This is the most important part of their story. They did not disappear. They adapted. They moved into smaller communities, simpler ways of life, closer to nature, more sustainable. Today, millions of Maya people still live in regions like Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They are not remnants of the past. They are living, vibrant, present. Many still speak ancient languages, carry traditions, pass down knowledge. In the highlands, women still weave beautiful textiles, patterns filled with meaning, stories, memory. In villages, rituals continue, blending old beliefs with newer ones, honoring both history and change. The connection to land, to maize, to life remains strong. So the collapse was not the end of a people. It was the end of a system, of great cities, divine kings, and heavy demands on the land. The silent cities are not graves. They are places left behind, echoes of a different way of life. And as another soft stroke spreads across the canvas, you may feel that quiet understanding. Nothing truly disappears, it simply changes. For many years after their rediscovery, one mystery still remained. The carvings, the glyphs, still could not be read. Scholars believed they were only symbols, not true writing. One influential voice, J. Eric S. Thompson, argued strongly for this idea. And for a long time, his view shaped everything. The Maya remained silent. The first real change came from far away in a quiet apartment in post-war Leningrad. A young linguist, Yuri Norisov, looked at the glyphs differently. He saw not just pictures, but sound, meaning, language. He suggested they were phonetic, representing spoken words. It was a bold idea. But it was not accepted, not at first. The breakthrough would come from someone unexpected. An artist, an architect, Tatiana Proskuryakov. Through careful study, through detailed drawings, she began to notice patterns, stories, histories, hidden in the stone. And as the brush continues its soft, flowing motion, you may feel that final shift beginning as the silent cities prepare to speak again. Now, let your thoughts rest gently here, like paint drying slowly on the canvas. And as we move toward the final part of this journey, you may feel yourself becoming more still, more relaxed, and quietly drifting towards sleep. Take a quiet moment to like this video and subscribe. It's a small gesture, but it helps this calm space grow, and I truly appreciate it. Now, as we come to the final part of our journey, let everything slow down just a little more in the quiet study of ancient stones. A small but powerful discovery began to take shape. At the site of Piedras Negras, a series of carved monuments held a repeating pattern. Dates, spaced across time. When Tatiana Proskuryakov studied them closely, she noticed something unusual. The dates on a single monument stretched across about 60, maybe 80 years, the length of a human life. In a sudden, calm flash of insight, she understood. These were not abstract symbols, not distant cosmic patterns. They were human stories. The earliest date marked a birth, a later one, the rise to power, and the final, the end of a life. These stones were not just carvings, they were biographies. When her work was published, it changed everything. It showed, beyond doubt, that the Maya had been recording their own histories all along. The old belief that the glyphs were only symbolic began to fade, and the ideas of Yuri Norisov, who had long argued that the script carried sound, language, meaning, were finally understood. From that moment, progress came quickly. A new generation of scholars, working together, sharing ideas, began to read the stones. The names of rulers from cities like Tikal and Palenque emerged once more. Stories of wars, alliances, marriages, lives that had once been lost to silence, returned softly into memory. The deciphering of the Maya script became one of the great achievements of modern understanding. It transformed the Maya from distant, mysterious figures into real people. People with ambition, with struggle, with stories that feel familiar. And at last, the silent cities could speak in their own words. And as another gentle stroke blends into the canvas, you may feel that sense of completion, something whole, finally understood. We began with a mystery. Great cities, hidden in the jungle, once alive, now silent. And slowly, step by step, we have followed their story. From their golden age to their long, quiet decline. Through clues in the soil and carvings in stone, through war, through changing land, through a sky that stopped giving rain, what remains is not just a story of the past. It is something more. A quiet reflection. The Maya remind us that even the most advanced civilizations can be fragile. That success, when pushed too far, can create imbalance. That the relationship between people and nature is delicate and deeply important. But their story is not only a warning, it is also a story of resilience. Because the Maya people did not disappear. They adapted. They changed. They endured. Through hardship, through time, through change. And today, millions still live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. Their languages, traditions, and connection to the land continue. So what remains are two legacies. The silent cities, their pyramids rising beneath the trees, a reminder of how high a civilization can reach and how quietly it can fade. And the living Maya people, who carry their culture forward, proving that true legacy lives within people, not stone. The silent cities are more than ruins. They are a mirror. They invite us to think gently about our own world, our choices, our environment, our future. The Maya believed in cycles of creation and change, and their story reminds us that nothing, no matter how powerful, lasts forever. And now, as the painting continues, as the story softly fades, let your thoughts become lighter, your breath slower, your body more at ease. Thank you for being here, for sharing this calm journey. I hope this story has brought you peace and a gentle sense of wonder. And now, I wish you a calm, restful, and deeply peaceful night. Good night, sweet dreams.